57talk.com, Gary Cubetta back again, Scottsdale, Arizona, and proud to have with us again J.J. Dillon. J.J., pleasure to have you back.
Thank you, Gary. I'm glad we've had a chance to pick up our conversation and continue talking wrestling.
1974, you leave Canada, go to work with the Funks in Amarillo, Texas.
Yes.
Give me some, what brought you to their territory?
Well, back to when I started in the Carolinas, I think in our first interview I mentioned that Dory Funk had a conversation with me when he came in to defend the title that at some point he would like to see me, consider working the Amarillo territory, and that thought it would be a great fit for me, and that if I decided to come there that, they would take care of me, that I would be happy there, and it would be, a successful step up in my career. So I knew that the situation in the Maritimes was seasonal through that fall, and so actually I don't remember at what point I made the commitment. It may have been right after I went to Canada, agreed that when I was done that I would go right from there to Amarillo. And oddly enough, during that summer I got a call out of the blue that Dory Funk Sr. had a massive heart attack and passed away. So that was kind of a sad moment. But then when I finished in the Maritimes, I think I worked in Florida I worked in I think a week or two in Georgia, and kind of worked my way across and went to Amarillo. But it was one of my favorite places in the world. The trips could be lengthy. You're on the road 3-4 nights a week, but just to work with Dory Funk and Terry Funk, and Dick Murdoch was there, Ricky Romero, Killer Carl Cox was in there the first year. The great Cyclone Negro, a name that you don't hear too often. Just the depth of the talent. Nick and Jerry Kozak, which were a great team, and Jerry Kozak actually was semi-retired and promoted Amarillo itself. So the depth of talent, just phenomenal, and again, a great learning experience, and a chance to work on top, and I had a great run actually for that year, working almost a year-long program with Dick Murdoch.
Now, I've driven through West Texas a number of times. It's for people who haven't been in that part of the country, it's very different than most of the rest of the United States. The town, what type of drive did you have in between?
Well, Amarillo itself was a great town. It was like going back in time. When I got there, the years of the oil boom and cattle and everything had pretty well passed. There was a large military base that was, I think, still open, but it just was a great town and great people, and I made some wonderful friends there. But we worked Amarillo in the fairgrounds at the arena that was actually in the fairgrounds itself every Thursday night, and then for that year, Friday, we would go down to Lubbock, which was about 100-mile drive due south. That was promoted by Nick Roberts, who was an old-time wrestler himself and a great guy, and his wife was a former wrestler, a lady wrestler, and their daughter was Nicola Roberts, who was better known as Baby Doll later in her career, and of course our paths crossed, but later on. But at that point, she was just a young girl, and when I knew her. And Saturday morning we would get up and do a studio show in Amarillo, and every other week we would then, as soon as we got done the TV show, jump in the car and drive pretty good trip, 300 plus miles up into Colorado, either Pueblo or Colorado Springs. Towns alternated, and the odd time we would stay in Amarillo. They had a small show in Hereford that's just a few miles outside of Amarillo. The big town of the week was Sunday in Albuquerque, so you either stayed in Amarillo after TV if you did Hereford, and then you had a 300-mile trip over to Albuquerque, or if you went up to Colorado that were good towns, drew well, and you could make a good payday, you had a lengthy drive, 300-plus miles, down into Albuquerque, and Albuquerque showed tape that you had aired, that you had recorded Saturday morning, and where you did promos on Thursday in the afternoon that were inserted in the various towns for the upcoming week. Mike London, the promoter in Albuquerque, had a very successful thing of actually doing in-studio live interviews with the actual talent, and he was kind of a bit of a maverick. He didn't believe in newspaper ads or posters and pre-advertising. The fans, when they turned on the show at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's when he would announce what the card that night was in Albuquerque, and then there would be interview segments throughout the show that, like I said, that you do there live with Mike London, who, as successful promoter as he was not a great interview, but he was a bizarre character. And when we finished Albuquerque Sunday night, we would then drive due south a couple hundred miles plus to El Paso, spend usually Sunday night, wrestle Monday in El Paso, was right on the border with Juarez, that has now become a very dangerous town to visit. Back in those days, it was it was a great experience to go across the border. And then Tuesday, we had about a 240-mile drive over to Odessa, Texas, and then from Odessa, it was about the same distance back on into Amarillo, so that we'd get home for a night and change clothes. And then Wednesday was about a 250 or plus more, 275-mile trip to Abilene, Texas, and turn around. We were done and come back and sleep in our bed that night, but we'd get in late and had interviews Thursday and do it all over again. So a 7-day-a-week thing. As I look back, I say, well, how did I ever keep up that schedule? But if you love the business and we're excited to have an opportunity, which I was, work talent that I could work with, the reputation of so many great wrestlers that had come through Amarillo. And in those days when you're young and excited about the business, you don't think about all the hard work.
JJ, did the Funks have like a wrestling office that they worked out of?
Not really. The actual promoter of the business, if they had to make a reference to a promoter or someone make some kind of a decision, Herman Gust was actually an uncle of Dory and Terry, and was Dory Funk's brother. And he lived there in town, and we would go over his house sometimes on a Thursday afternoon and just kick around ideas, do some brainstorming. So they actually didn't have a physical office with an address.
The look and feel of a house show in Amarillo back in 1974, 1975, how would it differ from some other parts of the country? The fans, the heat of the arena?
I don't know that it was all that different than other places. And I've said many times in the past, true, that wrestling fans are the greatest fans in the world. They're the most loyal, and there were people, religiously, a lot of the same faces that you see every Thursday night would come and sit in the same seats, and many of them would be in the studio Saturday morning, though that was a much smaller crowd because of the size of the studio. Albuquerque was, you have a large Native American Indian population living in the Albuquerque area, and they really loved Ricky Romero. He was their hero. And so, you would see different faces, and again, you're 300 miles and really a whole different look to the city. Albuquerque, beautiful city, nestled right at the foot of the mountains, and a much larger city than Amarillo. El Paso is a great city too, a large city, and kind of with Juarez across the river and the border separated, it was almost like one huge city. And again, you had a large Hispanic population because you're right there in the border with Mexico. So Amarillo was one audience, Albuquerque was another audience, and a city like El Paso was a third kind of an audience. But they all the TV catered to all of them, and they were all great towns. It was a great territory to work.
Did you need to have a Funk on the show to draw?
No. Certainly they meant something, and maybe, as crazy as it sounds, they may have meant a little bit less in the Amarillo territory than maybe they did in some other parts of the country, because those fans had watched them from kids grow up in college and start their careers, and watch them, both of them go on to become world champions. So they got to see the Funks wrestle a lot, and so it's very hard to gauge their drawing power. But I know that any time that I wrestle one of the Funks, I knew it was going to be a big house. And Dick Murdoch, though he would go out to other places, was a huge card there. One of the greatest workers that I ever faced throughout my career. And Ricky Romero lived there as well. And like I say, he appealed to the Native American fans, to the Hispanic fans. So there was a lot of areas of appeal. But if the Funks weren't there, Murdoch and Ricky Romero certainly had the strength to draw. And a lot of times they would run in, there were Indian reservations not that far out of Albuquerque up in the mountains and down in the southern part of the state between El Paso and Odessa. And a lot of times Ricky Romero would be in the main event in those towns and was over well enough to draw by himself without any of the Funks being on the card or without even Murdoch being on the card.
What role did you have with the company at the time? You had started to do a little bit of main eventing in the Crockett territory. You had that good summer run up in Nova Scotia. Where did they fit you in?
Yeah, I was a main event traction for that year and kind of picked up on the momentum from the Maritimes and the confidence that gave me. They had a Western States heavyweight title, and they had and I think it was an international title, and I held both during the time that I was there, and I don't know if I held the tag titles during that year, but I was a featured performer, but it was also a situation where the depth of the talent was so great that you could be in the main event 1 week or in a big mega card, you could be in a co-featured match, or you could be in a semi-main event spot on the card, and that did not diminish how you perceive in terms of being a main eventer because of the depth of talent in the territory. But I had a phenomenal run for the year that I was there, and like I say, I made tours of Japan, one at the front end, one at the back end.
Do you remember the Lawman?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he was the promoter in Abilene.
Oh, he was Abilene, because I remember there used to be, I was a fan back 70s and some of the programs, and he'd have these brutal main events where he was in like chain matches. And, tell me a little bit about him.
He was a bizarre character too. Had a great reputation in Abilene, had a bail bond service, so they all knew that he was, a strange character and kind of an off-the-wall kind of guy, and certainly they respected him and his wrestling ability. And he didn't work the other towns in the territory all that much, but you could draw. He was a major attraction when he did wrestle, and the town was not one of the hottest towns in the territory. And of course, by the end of the week, after having been in Amarillo and Albuquerque and El Paso, it was a long drive, and you'd just gotten home and turned right around and had to leave early because a 250-mile trip down to Abilene, and it just drew so-so, but it's just part of how it is in the wrestling business. Not every town does the same level of business. Abilene did not have a huge population. It was kind of along the size of Amarillo or Lubbock, but it's not like, well, hey, I don't want to work Abilene, I want a day off. You're committed to the territory and you work all the towns.
Head for Japan next. Was this your first trip?
Yes. Actually, I went into the territory in November and immediately locked horns with Murdoch. Was there for about 6 weeks and did an angle where Dick had, in a chain match, had wrapped a chain around my head and came off the top rope and appeared to have broken my jaw, which, we shut this loudmouth up pretty quickly. And in those days, you could leave and go to Japan, and you didn't have the media that you do today, that everybody knows where everybody is at any given time. And you could go to Japan for 4 weeks, and the fans in Amarillo, based on the TV that was produced there, it's like, oh, well, Dick Murdoch shut him up, ran him out of town. And I came back from Amarillo, I came back from Japan and flew through Denver into Amarillo and actually landed on a Thursday night at about 8 o'clock, and immediately went to the arena and was snuck in the back door with a towel over my head. And then at a key moment in a match with Murdoch, I busted out of the dressing room, went in and laid him out in a pool of blood, and we were off and running again. So, I mean, it was just it was a different time in the business.
Tell me about your impressions the first trip to Japan.
I was fascinated. Even to today, Japan is still my favorite place in the world. I like the Japanese people. I like the culture, which differed so greatly from ours. Respect for the elders, respect for authority. It just was such a different place, and like none that if you've never left the United States, going to the Orient is quite an experience. And the other thing is how well we treated. They pick you up at the airport in a big bus, and young boys take your luggage and put it on the bus, and you go to a first-class hotel in the Ginza, and somebody has you pre-registered and hands you a key, and you're treated very well. In fact, that always stuck in the back of my mind, and I talk about it in my autobiography, Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls, that after going to Japan and seeing how well we were treated, I would go so far as to say pampered. And the one referee traveled with us to make sure that, that we ate and stayed out of trouble and what have you. And in years that followed, I saw a lot of guys that I knew in Japan, Japanese wrestlers, that then in turn came to our country and basically were left to fend for themselves. In other words, you figure out how to learn to speak the language, and you'll get handed a booking sheet like everybody else and get yourself a road map, figure out how to get to the towns. And it sounds overly harsh, but really that was almost like it was. And of course the Japanese boys would try to, if another one was in the territory, which wasn't always the case, be able to help one of the other Japanese guys. Sometimes there was no one else. I never forgot how well I was treated over there, and if I could have one of the Japanese boys come to my home and get a home-cooked meal, that was my way of kind of saying thank you for the way I was treated in your country.
Back in the day, in the 70s and the 80s, Japan would have these huge tours, and guys would come in group from the United States from all different territories, and the talent level was just extraordinary.
Yes.
Do you remember it being that way when you first went to Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first tour that I went over there, Jack Briscoe, Jerry Briscoe, Harley Race, Bob Geigel was still wrestling a few matches. Wasn't wrestling here, but wrestled on the tour over there. Bulldog Bob Brown, a young Bob Backlund. The depth talent, like you say, it was like a melting pot of top guys from different territories around the country on any given tour, and just an incredible experience to go there and be part of that.
JJ, do you think the fans at the time, it was only maybe 30 years after Hiroshima, do you think had they really warmed up to Americans at that point, or was it just they liked the entertainment that the American provided?
That's a tough question. I'm sure because of the language, there were still people who, remembered the war, and there may have been some bitterness, but you didn't, if it was there, it was not open. It wasn't a hostile atmosphere by any stretch of the imagination. And if anything, as a professional wrestler, you had a high level of respect in that country. You were respected. People were very polite to you. Being a professional wrestler was a prestigious thing in Japan.
Did you like the food?
Yeah, I'm not one for noodles and some of the traditional Japanese food, but you could eat well in that country. We stayed in very nice hotels, and in virtually every hotel that we stayed, there was some kind of a breakfast buffet, which was probably the best value of the day. That would include scrambled eggs, bacon, and where normally if you went to a restaurant, and ordered off a menu, you would get a very small portion of eggs. You would get like 2 strips of bacon strategically placed on the plate, and if you were a wrestler with a large appetite, it wasn't very filling. But the breakfast buffet, you could go and have eggs, have bacon, and eat as much as you want, and have toast and hash browns, and they would have salad, they would have fruit. It was a great bargain, and they were a good way to start the day.
Did you go out on the towns by yourself, just to see the sights, or would you go with one of the other guys?
Once I got confident, and that's another thing about Japan, I felt it was a very safe country, especially, even in the small towns. You could get out and walk the streets without fear of, being in danger. Same thing in Tokyo. And once I learned the subway system and learned to get around, I was very adventurous. I would see things in Tokyo that I wanted to see and think nothing of getting in there on their subway, and sometimes having to change 2 or 3 places to get to, like the electronics district, or get to, and I brought a lot of artifacts back, a lot of memorabilia over the year of, like Japanese dolls. I have a ceremonial kimono that I hang in my bedroom that I brought from there. I really, really like Japan, like the Japanese people, and have some great memories from there.
Was there one Japanese wrestler in particular that you saw at the time, even famous or not famous, that you have a keen eye for talent that you thought, oh man, this is something special?
I have to say that I thought they were all good, because they they came up the hard way, and it was a lot of times difficult for us as Americans. But the young boys, would go into these. They would have to work their way up, pay their dues. You would watch them when you got there; they would be already there, and the ring would be set up, and they would be in the ring training, and it'd be nothing for one guy to stand there and take 50 body slams to the point that he would be physically drained, where he physically couldn't get back up to his feet. And they all went through that. They all went through that kind of I don't want to call it ritualistic, but maybe it is ritualistic, because I've seen sumo, which is very much the same way. When they're trying to develop a sumo wrestler, they'll take him and just line up 10 or 15 fresh guys, and he has to take in the next fresh guy, who then goes to the back of the line, and he's facing each one, and they wear them down to the point of exhaustion, and it's almost like a test of will. Are you willing to pay the price? Is this what you want to do? So I found all of the Japanese wrestlers, almost without exception, had great respect for the business because of what they had to do to earn their way in. And when I was there, of course, Giant Baba was a huge star. The Destroyer, the original Destroyer, was actually living in Japan, traveling with the Japanese. Lived there, had his family there, and he was it was unbelievable. He wore the mask everywhere that he went. He did a comedy show, a weekly comedy show on television, where he would do these skits and spoke some Japanese, probably pretty fluent Japanese. And I saw Jumbo Tsuruta come into the business. I saw Tendu come into the business. The Barbarian and Haku, or Meng, who's had several names here, come through that system. One of my best friends in the business to this day, Akio Sato, I watched him as a very young boy start his career, and then come over here and saw him later in Amarillo. It's just a lot of guys that I saw over there, many of whom came here and weren't necessarily big stars, but they were able to come here, and because of the respect they had for the business and the understanding of fundamentals, they were all great performers in this country.
JJ, what type of jet lag is involved with a trip? Let's say you said you took your first tour to Japan, then you came back to Amarillo. It's a pretty long flight, right?
Yeah, it is. And in fact, my first time over there, I think we used to depart from, and it hadn't been that long that they'd done that, but they departed from, I think, Seattle, and then were able to fly along the Aleutian Islands direct into Japan. And of course, since then, they've expanded where you could, in later times when I was working management, I could fly direct, from the East Coast, from Atlanta to go to Japan. But it was like, a 16-hour trip over, doing it that way. And because of the jet stream coming back, it was less, maybe 14 hours. But that's a long time to sit on a plane. But again, when you're young, it doesn't seem as posing a task to do that as it would today for me to go to Japan now. As much as I love the country, I'd have to think twice about having to get on a plane, and because they make the plane smaller, the seats smaller, and to sit there for 16 hours to get to Japan, to me, would be a brutal trip.
Yeah, sure. I feel the same way. You get back, you're in Amarillo. What's next? Did you stay in the territory for a while? Did you move on?
Actually, I had already been set up. The Funks, they were very smart, and I kind of knew too that in a small territory like that, where you're working weekly town, unless you're a Ricky Romero or a Dick Murdoch that make it your home, especially as a heel, you couldn't stay there forever. You were going to burn out in time, and the secret was always to move on before you were burnt out, so that you could come back and hopefully do it all over again. So I knew at the end of the year, with the 2 Japan trips taken out of the mix, that it was time to move on, and I had planned. The Funks had actually set it up for me to go from there to Florida. I was excited at the prospect of working for Eddie Graham, who had a big influence in my career, and I went to see him in Madison Square Garden as a kid when he was teamed with Dr. Jerry Graham, and heard all these wonderful things about what a genius he was, and how he his understanding of the psychology of the business, and how he had molded Jack Briscoe, and was very hands-on in developing his career, and also had great success with Dusty Rhodes. Bill Watts had been there and had had a great run. In fact, when I went in, was to go in there, Bill Watts was just kind of winding down. It had been the booker, and they were bringing in Bobby Shane, who was also kind of one of the younger creative guys in the business, who was highly respected, who had just had a great run in Australia and was coming in to be the booker. And I, in Amarillo, worked Christmas, up to Christmas, and then I was to take a week off, go to Japan in January, and then come back for a month, kind of have blow-off matches around before I went to Florida. And there was an incident in Amarillo where I was in a cage match with Killer Carl Cox, and at the end of the match, Carl Cox, drops me with a brainbuster in the middle of the ring, and before the fans knew it, here came Blackjack Mulligan, ripped the door open, came in the ring, and went in his tights and took a bottle of black India ink that you would use in a fountain pen and threw it in the face of Cox and kind of blinded him. And of course, I'm up by then. The two of us put the boots to him, and we had a near riot on the way back to the dressing room. Some young kid that was sitting high up in the bleachers with a cowboy hat pulled down over his nose, just came running down from the bleachers and ran up the aisle. And as strange as it is, he ran right past me. Here I am, little over 6 foot, 6'1" at that point, and probably 220 pounds, and ran right by me for Blackjack Mulligan, who, if you've seen Blackjack in his prime, he was a monster of a man. And this kid proceeded to try and throw a drop kick, and his feet hit Mulligan around the waist, and he just fell back, straight down on his back. And almost in the same motion, Mulligan grabbed him by his belt buckle and by the top of his shirt, hoisted him straight in the air over his head, and just dropped him to the floor. And the kid hit with such force that he flipped over on his stomach, and just about as quick as he hit, Mulligan had him again by the seat of the pants and the back and neck up in the air the second time. And when he dropped him the second time, there was blood coming out of both ears and his nose, and of course, when something like that happens at the moment, you don't know if he's armed with a knife or what it is. And I'm thinking of protecting Blackjack, and I'm kicking at this kid, and his kid's going up and down as big as Mulligan is. I never laid a hand on the kid, though certainly I was trying to protect Mulligan at that point. And of course, there were security people by there. We stepped over and went to the dressing room, and from there I went home to the East Coast for Christmas, and got a phone call, I think even before I departed for Japan. And apparently this kid was like 17 years old. His father was pretty influential and a bigwig in Amarillo, and a well-to-do family, and he was going to file this horrendous lawsuit. So Dory Funk said, you're leaving from here to go to Japan. My suggestion is that you not even come back to Amarillo. I think you're going to get served probably with papers, and I don't know how this is all going to play out. And I've already talked to Florida, and just your starting date up a month, and you'll go right from Japan to Florida. So that's what I did.
JJ, what was it if a fan would come into the ring or attack a wrestler? What was pretty much the rule of thumb? It's open season.
Back in the day, I would say pretty much yes, especially in a setting like that, because sometimes the numbers, if the fans come in mass, and you didn't have the, security like, we think of today, and a lot of times you're not completely on your own, but, the intimidation factor of who you were had a lot to do with it. And if somebody tried you, you had to do what you had to do. And the general rule of thumb was, you would, even if somebody yelled at you, threw something at you, you would never leave the ring, go out and go into the audience after them. But if they came over, and a lot of times you didn't even have barricades. The fans' chairs just were feet away from ringside, and the fans got up, and if they made that move to the ring and came through the rope, that was kind of the invisible barrier that, okay, now you're in my house and you're in fair game. But as times change, some guys got hit with lawsuits, even though guys thought they were defending themselves, which in reality they were. You get to court and it's a different story. There you're sitting, and the other attorneys, well, you're a experienced professional wrestler. Yeah, I've been in the business how long? You've had so many matches. Here's this guy who got so excited because that's part of what you do. Isn't that correct? Well, yeah. Part of my job is to make them mad. Well, This guy got so mad he came in the ring. Our feeling is that as a professional, you should have been able to control him and immobilize him without having success force. And, some guys had to go in their pocket and pay some damages, in theory, defending themselves.
Hey, JJ, if they had a good lawyer by the time they were done, probably be agreeing with him. You'd like,
yeah, that's kind of how it went. So, things changed.
So you go into Florida now. When you went into Florida, was it Dusty as a villain or Dusty as the American Dream?
Oh, Dusty, definitely the American Dream. And actually, Dusty, I don't remember Dusty was already there. I don't think he was. Bill Watts was huge card. Mr. Wrestling 2 was a huge card. Jack Briscoe was a huge card. And, Bobby Shane was also going to get the big push as a heel. Dick Slater was there, very popular. He was from that area. He and Mike Graham had been buddies, and they grew up together in school. Everybody knew who Dick Slater was. And my first night in the territory was on a Tuesday night in Tampa, and I was actually tag partner of Bobby Shane, his first,
wow.
And I don't remember who our opponents were. I'd have to look back. I have it in my archive somewhere. And the next day we did TV, flew to Miami after TV, do the house show in Miami, and it was on the flight back from Miami where Buddy Colt was also another big card. Bob Roop was there because I was on Buddy Colt had actually bought his own plane, had about 100-hour experience, and on the plane was Buddy Colt flying, Playboy Gary Hart, Dennis McCord, who later became Austin Idol, and Bobby Shane. And I was on a second plane where we had leased it and had hired a pilot fly us, and it was Dick Murdoch, Bob Roop, and myself. And it's kind of eerie as I remember looking out the window of our small plane. Buddy Colt taxied past, and I remember looking out the window, seeing Bobby Shane waving to him. Hit a line of weather between Miami going back to Tampa, and we got rocked around pretty good, and had some beer on the plane, kind of having some laughs. And I remember approaching Tampa, the pilot was just glued to his instruments, glued to the steering the plane as we were being jolted around, and rain just teeming off the windscreen of the plane. And I remember a radio transmission saying, when you land firm 456 BC, which was the call letters on Buddy Colt's plane, we had them on final, but did not confirm, that they landed. And what had happened as the weather came through, they actually closed Tampa International Airport. There's a very small airport out on the peninsula called Peter O'Knight, and we were diverted there, and we were going to land there. And, as we were getting coordinates on the radio to our pilot, to change altitude, change direction as we were being vectored into Peter O'Knight, one of the transmissions says, forget 456 BC, we have a report they're down in the bay. And there was then just silent. And as we landed, there were some people, I guess, that were on radio scanners that knew something had happened, and supposedly some wrestlers crashed. They didn't know if they crashed at the airport or what. And of course, we didn't have vehicles there because that's not where we'd left from. And there were some fans said, "Hey, we'll take you back over to the other airport to get your vehicles." And as we were coming out of the airport, we could see the lights of the ambulance, and went down to see what it was and got out. And I think Gary Hart had already gone to the hospital when that ambulance left. I don't know if Dennis McCord was in the hospital. We didn't see him, but one of the guys was laying on the ground between two houses. Where the plane went down in the bay was at the rear end of a home, and the tide was out. So the guys, Gary Hart, had all his clothes basically torn off him from the impact of the crash, and he had this horrible gash over his one eye and just covered with blood. And he actually physically climbed up a ladder on the seawall and walked up to the back of this house and pounded on the door till a guy answered. And it was I think he was a doctor, and he was Hispanic, spoke no English. And of course, on the back appears a man covered with blood, naked, pounding on his back door. And by the time we got there, paramedics, emergency vehicles everywhere, and there was Buddy Colt who they had helped, and he crawled up that far and was laying on the grass. His one ankle was grotesquely bent in a direction that it would not normally go, which was later were surgically fused. And I remember, Buddy was a big guy, and the paramedics were having a difficult time, and that Dickie and I had to each get on an opposite side of Buddy Colt, physically lift him onto a board where they put him on a stretcher and pick him up and get him to an ambulance in the hospital. And at that point, we didn't know about the fate of Bobby Shane. There was helicopters, flying around, crisscrossing with searchlights, looking for the wreckage, looking for any other survivors. And it wasn't until the next morning we had found that Bobby Shane was still strapped in the plane and had died on impact.
So you could see the plane from the shore?
No.
Okay.
It wasn't until the weather passed and some divers went down and found the wreckage, and basically the way they, and there of course all the stories surfaced that Bobby Shane had clutched it to try to tear his seatbelt loose and drowned, and I talked to one of the divers who said that the whole top of the plane was gone. It looked like the Incredible Hulk had reached into the dashboard and just tore everything out. There were wires and things everywhere, and the plane with the rest of the part of the fuselage was still intact. The seat was still in its place, and Bobby Shane still had his seatbelt on. And when they reached in with a knife and cut the seatbelt loose, his arms were just floating. He was knocked out on impact, apparently drowned, and never what happens. Not something where he suffered.
Could you tell by Buddy Colt's ankle that he probably was finished with wrestling? Were the injuries that severe? Because he never wrestled again.
Yeah, you don't know, and he had a couple of surgeries, and finally the damage was so severe that they had to fuse it. Basically, that did end his career, and he walked with a limp.
You wrestled with Bobby before his terrible death. What kind of talent? He was very young at the time. What kind of talent do you think he would have been in the business?
Again, I'd never seen him wrestle, never met him before, and was excited to again be changing territories. I had the momentum of the Maritimes, momentum of a fantastic year for the Funks, and 2 trips to Japan, and which certainly enhanced my reputation. And now I was going into Florida and not featured as a main event talent when I went in there because the depth of talent was so great. Did I work some main events in smaller towns? Yes, and I was high up on the card. Roger Kirby was there at the time, and he and I teamed regularly for a while, and we were Florida Tag Team Champions. I was television champion for a while. I was even the Florida Heavyweight Champion for a while. So it was a good spot for me, and with the death of Bobby Shane, of course, that threw everything upside down, and it ended up that Harley Race came in, took over the job as the booker, which was kind of a sudden thing, and so I spent almost a year working Harley, and of course, one of the greats of business. I have many fond memories, and just really enjoyed being around Eddie Graham. I was like a sponge anytime that I was there, and of course, Gordon Soley worked in the office and did the publicity. Duke Kiamuka worked in the office. He was one of the old wrestling legends.
Jay, let me interrupt you because I want to clarify this. Maybe I missed. Did you work one match with Bobby Shane, or you were going to work one match then?
I worked one match with Bobby Shane on Tuesday night. We were at the Tampa Armory. We were tag team partners. I don't remember who he wrestled Wednesday night in Miami. We weren't partners. I wrestled somebody else, and that was after that match on the trip back where he died in the plane crash.
Do you think he would have been a big star in the business, or hard to tell?
Hard to tell. I would like to think he would have based on his reputation and the run that he had in Florida. I think he would have done very well there. Eddie Graham was a great judge of talent, and the people that he brought in there, he brought out the best in.
How did Eddie treat the guys?
Eddie was great. He was such a detail person. When it came to finishes, Eddie would come down on Tuesday night, especially Tampa, and get very involved in the finishes. His finish would be like a short story in and of itself. And I already had respect for him, but gained so much added respect by just sitting there and listening for his reason, and then seeing everything that he talked about and the reasoning behind it. Once you got in the ring, to watch it all unfold, that it would unfold in stages. And I learned very, very early on that, like with Eddie, that attention to detail was critical to a finish getting over. And if something is done right, less is more. And that helped me as a manager later on, that I knew that I didn't have to be jumping up and down and be the center of attention, that the less I did, the better, as long as I did the right thing at the right moment, packed whatever was going on. And I learned that from really being around Eddie Graham. And Eddie, the Funks talk about that Eddie Graham and Dory Funk Sr. came from that similar background and that philosophy philosophy very much influenced other successful people like Cowboy Bill Watts, like Dusty Rhodes. You could trace back how it all began to Eddie Graham and to like Dory Funk Sr.
Would a promoter like Eddie at the time live a fairly flamboyant lifestyle financially? I mean, they're making a lot of money.
No, Eddie had his own plane, and certainly didn't dress in a flamboyant manner. His wife had a business in town; she ran a beauty shop, and Mike liked to drive a Corvette, but they were not. They were still considered the boys, and very much respected. And that was one of the highlights of my career, was being able to go there and be around Eddie Graham.
Florida had huge stars. Some of the great. Did the guys like to go down because of the weather, because of payoffs, because of Eddie, or was it just that Eddie was good at bringing in the talent?
Well, I think good at bringing in talent was one aspect of it. There was a general feeling throughout the business that he didn't get paid as well in Florida based on how well they drew as maybe one should have. But where else can you go and be in a territory that doesn't have long trips, that you could be home virtually every night with the exception of Miami, and you have the choice of coming home that night if you want to, and also being in an area with beautiful weather and be able to go to the beach every day. And that was kind of the trade. Well, I should have made more money, but I went and lived and worked in Florida, and one of the most successful territories history of the business.
And that's why I asked you about the flamboyant lifestyle, because I've heard from others that in their opinion, Eddie took care of the office first and some of the boys second, but he didn't show it off in any way.
I think that's probably a pretty fair assessment.
Okay. How'd you do in Florida?
Did well. Like I say, I held various championships, and it was, again, a part of my growing experience, learning from Eddie Graham, and I was treated very well for the time that I was there. And like I say, I ran into Stomper left, and it was while I was still there in Florida that I got the phone call about going to Dallas. So that was a big decision, I guess, in my career about becoming a manager, something that I had never even thought about before. Playboy Gary Hart was in the Carolinas when I first started and managed Hawk and Hans. Gary was a great manager in this year of business, and really underrated and underappreciated in terms of how big a star he was in business. When I got to Florida, he was also there and had managed Pac Song and done well too.
So what's Dallas like pre the Von Erich boys? Not much really is known about the territory back then, because after Kevin, Kerry, and David came along, there's a lot of video available. But before, not much.
Yeah, it was a great territory. When I went in there, met Fritz Von Erich. Fritz didn't work that much. Red Bastien was the booker. Red was working, and one of the greats in the history of our business. Rocky Johnson, the Rock's father, was there, and I had known Rocky Johnson from Florida. Peter Maivia was there, and knew Peter. Got to work with him. Jose Lothario was a huge star, especially in the. It was kind of strange because you had Dallas and Fort Worth on the north end of the territory, and they would run some small towns around Dallas, kind of fundraisers on Saturday night. And then Joe Blanchard was based out of San Antonio, and he would run on Wednesday nights and would usually televise the house show and do his own TV. And Thursday was Corpus Christi, which was his town. And then you would come across and work for Paul Bosch, who had a working agreement with Fritz in the Dallas office, and Paul was kind of like the same philosophy as Japan was, in terms of he would bring in talent from other parts of the country and showcase them, and did his own TV. So the best of all worlds is if you were an attraction in the north end of the territory in Dallas with Fritz, and also got your share of the top shots in Houston, which is where really the big money was. And then in the meantime, Joe Blanchard would kind of go with the flow that would complete your week, and you'd have some good payoffs and some so-so payoffs. But it was a unique territory, and then by and large you would have Sundays off.
JJ, was there a part of Texas where with a good TV antenna you could get most, if not all, of the promotion? Or was there no bleed, or was there a little bleed?
None that I remember, because they were so spread out that Dallas did their TV show that wasn't seen in Houston or down in San Antonio, and TV that Joe did was seen in San Antonio and Corpus, and Paul Falls TV was pretty much just for Houston. And if there was some crossover, I couldn't even begin to speculate where it was.
But it wasn't like, hey, I'm in Dallas and I'm seeing 4 different promotions. They're all doing different things on TV.
No, I'm definitely not like that.
And you said that Joe Blanchard televised house shows. I didn't know that. Is that in the 70s he did that?
Yeah, he would do TV out of the San Antonio shows on a Thursday night.
And was it all basically the same talent? Like, okay, Blanchard and Fritz, they kind of had similar talent, right?
Yes, and Jose Lothario definitely was featured in the San Antonio Corpus area and definitely a top attraction. Houston and worked sporadically at the other end for Fritz and didn't get the same degree of star treatment at the north end, though he certainly was still a respect talent.
Now Fritz diversified into many other areas financially. What did he seem to want to get at this time out of wrestling? Was it just a supplement, or was it his main source of finance?
I don't know. I know that he was, had gone to SMU, played football there. That was where that was home. He was highly respected in the community. Had done very well, and of course, I saw all of his kids basically hanging around the sportatorium and building in Fort Worth on Monday before they started their wrestling careers, very similar to the same situation in El Paso with all the Guerrero boys.
Now, you can answer this with just a simple yes or no. Did you see any signs of the problems that were going to come in the 1980s?
No, I can't say that there were any red flags. Mike Graham, I had seen him in Florida. He was Eddie's son, and I think Eddie, always hoped that. And Mike was a great talent. Mike paid his dues, but unfortunately, Mike was, he was not, 6'2" and 260 pounds, and I think that hurt Mike in terms of how big he could actually be in business. But he was a guy who earned everything that he got in terms of what success he did have in business. And I respect Mike Graham and consider him a friend to this day. The Von Erich kids and the Guerrero kids were just young kids hanging around, and I don't think at that point anybody thought about them, following in the footsteps of their fathers and breaking into business. You just think about that. And then typical, you're a wrestler and you're focused on your own career and what's in that town that week and how you could draw money and make.
Next, Atlanta, Georgia. They're televised nationwide. TBS. Nobody knew what lied ahead.
Yeah,
what did you think when you first came in?
Well, it was one of those things that when the Stomper had a rocky relationship with the manager that preceded me, and Bearcat Wright, and that relationship didn't last for long. And Archie was, he was a great worker. Really looked his gimmick, worked hard, trained hard to look menacing, which he was. But Archie got depressed very easy, and I think he probably took medication, and he was could be very moody. And what would happen? He had started up in Calgary with Stu Hart, and of course, I found this out that once I got there, that he would be very excited in the beginning, which he was, and we went there, and this was all new to me and a new experience, and I was just jumped in with both feet, gave it everything that I had, and I thought things were going well. But Archie, the least little thing, it would be like, this isn't going to work out. They got no plans for us, and it's like, Archie, what are you talking about? And what happened was while we were in Dallas, and I don't know exactly how long been there, we'd been there for some time, and the office called me and said, we can't get a hold of Archie. We can't reach him where he is. No, I ride together, but I hadn't seen him, and it was like over a weekend or something, and I said, well, the phone just rings, and I said, the only thing I can do is just go over there and make sure he's okay. And of course, when I got over there, the house was empty. In the middle of the night, he packed everything up and left town. And he'd go through one of these episodes. He would call Stu Hart, and Stu would embrace having Archie come home, and was excited to get him back to Calgary, where Archie could do his own promos. That's where he started, a big star there, and drew a lot of money. And that's what happened. Archie just up and left, and tell me, I didn't even know he was gone. And the office called me and said, well, a lot of the success is, on your shoulders, and we hope that you'll stay here, and we'll figure out something. And they got Dog Maine, who came in, and that's who I managed immediately. And then Houston, I managed a series of guys that included Professor Tanaka and Ken Patera, and Lonnie Main. So it worked out good for me. And again, I get another phone call.
Well, hold on, JJ, and we'll get to this in a minute. But I wasn't aware that you managed Moondog Maine in Georgia.
Actually in Texas.
Oh, okay.
And he was the guy that really came in to replace the Stomper, and the Dallas office gave him a big push, and I was the conduit that immediately gave him main event status because I brought him in and we were off and running. And of course, Lonnie Main was a main event wrestler. But in the meantime, after a run, and I'd have to look back to see what the exact time frame was. I get another call out of the blue, and it's Archie.
Wow.
He says, I feel so bad. He said it was such a mistake, and I shouldn't have left, and certainly shouldn't have left you. We had such a good thing going, and I'm hoping that that you're open to us getting back together again. In fact, he was talking to Vern Gagne, and he was talking to Jim Barnett in Atlanta, and I had kind of leveled out and was still there and doing okay, but didn't know what the future would hold because that wasn't the package that I first went in there with. And Stomper said, well, there's a good chance I might get a starting date for a top spot either in Minneapolis with Vern or with Barnett in Atlanta. And I said, all right, well, let me know. And we had a good thing going, and we were unique, and I'm open to let's do it again. And so it ended up got a starting date from Jim Barnett in Atlanta, and the very next day, Vern Gagne called to give us a starting date in Minneapolis. And I remember I called Vern, and Vern was not too excited with me because I guess not many people got a starting date in Minneapolis and then turned down the opportunity. But it's kind of like, if I give you my word, it wasn't like I was going to turn around and see who then could sweet talk me and give an indication that I was going to do better one place or another. I mean, Barnett had made the commitment. We had made the commitment back, and I was going to get to my word. And I basically said to Vern, if the shoe had been on the other foot and we'd made the commitment to you, I would do the same thing to you. I would honor that commitment and not listen to what somebody else said they were going to do for them. We went into Atlanta and did well in Atlanta and turned around, and the same thing happened again. Archie up and disappeared.
Oh, boy.
And at the time, Abdullah the Butcher was there. They put me with Abdullah, and that was the beginning of a pretty nice run with Abby. I ended up going to Japan with him, and then while we were in Japan, Amarillo had kind of bottomed out and was having a pretty tough time. And Dory Funk and Terry Funk said, you had such a phenomenal run in Amarillo, and which they had never done before. They were willing to try to put together a package and give us a small guarantee for Abdullah to come in and me to come in and manage him. And all the promoters had, put together a little money in Amarillo to be able to assure that we would have our guarantee each week, that we would make no less than whatever that number was. I don't remember. Okay. And at the time, Art Nelson was helping with the booking, and Art was very, very kind to me when I first started in Amarillo. And so the thought, or in Charlotte, so the thought of going back and seeing Art again and being able to help the territory, and very, very open to working with Art. And of course, that's when Bob Orton Sr. was territory at the time. So I, met with Terry in Japan, and Abdullah and I made the commitment that we would then go into Amarillo. And Terry said, well, we would like you to do an interview tonight from the ring in Japan that we'll record and fly back and insert in our show back in Amarillo. And the people here in Japan will have no idea what's going on. That'll be tremendous impact. You sending a tape from Japan that you're coming in and bringing this. They wanted me to call him my black specimen, and Abdullah liked that phrase too. My black specimen, Abdullah the Butcher. And I remember being in the middle of the ring, doing an interview, and said, I'm sending this message to all the great fans in West Texas from Tokyo, Japan, and I have good news and I have bad news. And good news is that as great a career as I had and all the titles I held, and as much as I ran roughshod over Dick Murdoch and everybody else, I retired. That's bad news is I'm coming back and I'm bringing with me my black specimen, and his name is Abdullah the Butcher. And here come Abdullah out of the back through the crowd and chairs flying everywhere, Japanese fans scattering to the winds, and that was the promo that they showed back in Amarillo, and of course we're immediately off and running.
JJ, was there a specific reason you transitioned from wrestling to managing? Injury, or just thought it would be a better fit for you?
It just was a great opportunity to step into a main event spot, and also I was not blessed with the physical size of a Hulk Hogan, a superstar Billy Graham, and I hated going to the gym and training. I hated working out, and my strong suit was my interview. The reason I drew money the first time in Amarillo, I was 6'1" plus and probably 220, 225 soaking wet. And here's Dick Murdoch, who was every bit of 6'4", 6'5", and probably 280. He was the babyface, and I was the heel because I ran my mouth and made people mad, and they wanted to see me get my butt kicked. And when I did, I would do things to pull off, surprise wins with underhanded tactics, and the people just, wanted to see me get killed that much more. And I would brag and always put my own spin on things. They wanted me shut up. So, having said that, I could see where being a manager was then utilizing what were my greatest strength, my interviews. And I think that did help me. But at the same time, all the experience that I had garnered as a wrestler gave me that understanding of what the role was. And I'd been a babyface and I'd been a heel, and I'd worked on top. So as a manager, I knew the dynamics of whatever was going on in the ring or in the match or the setup of the match or the big picture. And all of that, really helped me. And also it kind of gave me, there were some managers who never wrestled, and so they always felt, I thought anyway, a subtle pressure. Well, I have to be out there and do something so that the promoter, sees that I have value to his promotion, and that way that's my job security. I never had that feeling because I knew I could wrestle, and if push came to shove, I could do that. And as a manager, when I got cornered into situations where it was either a handicap match or I had to face somebody, I had the skills to be able to go in and pull that off as well. That really helped.
So you bring Abby into Amarillo. Does it help the territory?
Oh, yeah.
We did. Okay.
We did incredible business right from the get-go. The problem was, Abdullah was not a kid. He'd been, a huge star in Japan, worked on top of just about everywhere he went. Started in Calgary himself, I think, which had long trips. But now Abby was back in West Texas, and, you add up the mileage of those trips, and very tough on a guy like Abby, especially a big man physically like that, to sit in a car for that length of time. And he would get sleep apnea. He'd be riding around pulling the side of the road and be not uncommon to go by and see his car pull over, and he'd be sitting behind the wheel sound asleep with the engine running. So needless to say, we had a great run for a while, but it was not a lengthy run because it just physically was too demanding on Abdullah. And
kind of guy is he, JJ? I know you hear a lot of stories. He must eat a lot more than the average guy, right, to have that kind of mass, body?
Yeah, he has a healthy appetite. To me, it's the guys that I managed were all special people. Archie Goldie will always be very special to me because he was first. Abdullah because he was the right place, the right time for me, as was the situation with Lonnie Main. There was a lengthy period of time where I didn't see Abdullah, and it was after I had been retired from the ring, had worked for Vince McMahon, and saw Abdullah. And when I saw him, I was excited in my own mind with anticipation of seeing Abby again. And when I did see him, I kind of got a little bit of a cold shoulder at it, and it just completely surprised me. I think, aside without showing it, I was hurt a little bit and didn't really understand. And in time came to find out that one of my dreams was to wrestle in Madison Square Garden, and eventually my dream came true. I had one appearance in Madison Square Garden. Abdullah the Butcher, as great a star as he was in our business, and to me he's a Hall of Famer, never wrestled in Madison Square Garden, and that's kind of unfortunate. And I think that Abdullah felt that for the 7.5+ years that I worked so closely with Vince McMahon, that somehow there should have been an overture, a phone call, a good word put in, something would have opened that door for Abdullah to come in there and work that territory and work and had been in Madison Square Garden because he worked the territory. But anybody that knows Vince McMahon knows shows that, his vision of what he thought a wrestler should look like, Abdullah the Butcher did not fit that image. And so as big a star as Abby was in the business, he would not have appealed to Vince McMahon. And what a lot of people who are very smart people in this business, very successful people in this business, never really understood that Vince McMahon that's where the buck stopped, and he made all of decisions. And as is the case now with John Laurinaitis, and before him Jim Ross, and before Jim Ross it was me. You're the guy who takes virtually no credit for any of the things that are successful that happen, but anything that's negative, you're the guy who basically, Vince doesn't take the heat for anything. It's kind of a thankless job, and I had the temperament for it. I had the personality for it. I had been on the road and been a talent all my life, so it was easy for me to put my they say, you have to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. Well, I was able to do that because that's what I had done, and I was very sensitive to people. It never went to my head, that job. When you had to make calls about people being let go and that kind of thing, they were very, very difficult for me to do. And a lot of the guys, it became personal with them, with me, and even guys that came up there with the hopes of getting hired, and then it didn't happen. I was the one that had to make the phone call and say, right now, the timing's not right. We don't have something for you. And the guys thought that it must have been me bad-mouthing them, and that's why they didn't get a job. And a great example of that is Mick Foley. And when he first did his initial autobiography that was a huge hit, one of the things he put in there was initially he didn't have very flattering things to say about me, because when he came up there, he got rejected the first time around and thought it was because I didn't like him or because it was Vince McMahon, Mick Foley, and me that met with him.
JJ, I want to ask you something. You mentioned Abby coming into WWF, and you said that he was a style that Vince used. And I've always wondered why he didn't appear at least once. But Vince used guys like Yokozuna. Yokozuna was a superstar Graham Hulk Hogan type, but
that was much
a John Tenta.
much later on. And the other thing about Vince that I learned, and again I talk about that in my autobiography too, that Vince had the tendency to push and develop things that were of his own creation. And there were exceptions, but by and large, the guys that got the big push were guys that came in that he created. Undertaker became the Undertaker, and even Steve Austin had been Steve Austin, but Stone Cold was a characterization Vince created and ran with and held the rights to.
Right.
So, people to this day would say, well, how come Vince never brought he brought Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard in and put him with Bobby Heenan, but called him the Brainbusters.
Yeah.
Why didn't, what could Vince have done with his audience if he had taken the Horseman thing and ran with it? But the Horseman thing was not something Vince had created. It wasn't original to him. And so, and he never openly said that, but if you were around Vince, you realized that the things that he pushed were things that created, developed himself. When people ask me, I tell them that the answer is in the book, and you have to pick up a copy and read it to get in there far enough to see an explanation of where the title came from.
Fantastic.
But I will tell you this: on the jacket, wrestlers are like seagulls from McMahon to McMahon, and that has a double meaning because without giving it all away to read where the title came from, it has something to do with Vince Sr. and Vince Jr. And at the same time, McMahon to McMahon is kind of the span of my career. When I started as a referee with Vince McMahon Sr., and then the time that I retired, it was Vince Jr. says, "You walk away. I don't want to use you as an on-camera talent. I want your attention to detail, creative skills, and you're going to be a time off employee and no longer a wrestler." So from McMahon to McMahon, like I say, has a double.
JJ, it's been a real pleasure. I really appreciate you taking all this time from your schedule and giving the fans an opportunity to hear your career directly from you. I really appreciate it.
Well, and I'm sure at some point, we can pick up our conversation because there's so much more. I would encourage fans to go to my website, jjdillon.com, and it's been up and running probably 6, 7, 8, maybe 8 years. years now, and there's a lot of people don't know that I ever wrestled, but they just know of me as the leader of the Four Horsemen, that I was a manager, and basically my website talks about my breaking into the business, highlights of my career up the time that I became a manager, and like I say, other historians of business don't know that I had over 3,000 matches of my own in my career. And so if you go to jjdillon.com, you can not only see some old pictures throughout my career, you can also go to the JJ Pam Cam. Pam is my oldest daughter, and the last couple of years, every time I go to like one of these fan fests, or like when I was at Raw after WrestleMania when Flair retired, I took backstage candid shots with a lot of the current stars of today that I did business with throughout my career, and I've posted them on my website as well. And if you are interested in my autobiography, Wrestlers Like Seagulls, at the top of the main page of jjdillon.com. The spine of the book takes you to Crowbar Press. Is owned by Scott Teal, who's my co-author, and he's a very respected historian. He is a great author as well, and did Ole Anderson's autobiography prior to doing my book together. And also he's done Ivan Koloff, Assassin Jody Hamilton, about to come out with another book about Gordon Soley. He's written a lot of great things, and all of his publications are listed on there. And if you scan down on the main page, you'll see two other links also for the Cauliflower Alley Club and for the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame, two organizations that I'm very involved with. Cauliflower Alley's been around approaching 50 years, and I became a lifetime member, I think, in 2006, and I was honored by them for my body of work throughout my career. And the last 2 years at their annual banquet, which has been in Vegas every year since I've been a lifetime member, but I've been the host for the awards banquet, for the MC banquet for the last 2 years, and they've asked me to come back again next year. And meanwhile, Terry Funk called me and said, we had such a good time, would you be open to me and joining you for that? So that's official that next year when Cauliflower Alley has their annual thing, Terry Funk and I will do the honors together. In the meantime, I'm on the board of Direct Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and Museum up in Amsterdam, New York. They just had their 10th year induction, and as I tell every baseball fan, you die, you have to make a pilgrimage to Cooperstown, to Baseball Hall of Fame, advised description, see all that history and memorabilia. And I say the same to wrestling fans. You have to go to Amsterdam, New York. You have to see Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame. About President Tony Villano started it. It's the driving force. He has some great that are volunteers that have helped him get where it is. But like I say, Tony, who's not a wrestling fan, oddly enough, is on the commission in New York. He's been the driving force, and the memorabilia that they have up there and things that have been donated, pictures, posters, to walk around the museum, and you go to my link, see some pictures from the Hall of Fame and get a sense of what that's about. But
so jjdillon.com opens the doors to all this, and JJ, it's very well deserved, because you've had just an extraordinary career spanning over such a great time period and so many different aspects of the business that you had an important involvement in, and we congratulate you for that, and it's very well deserved.
Well, I appreciate it, Gary, and I had a unique perspective from being on the inside for all this, from the early years after wrestling was already established on television, through, as you pointed out, the impact of how cable television changed everything, to retiring and going to work for Vince McMahon at a time that it was still the World Wrestling Federation, and they were at peak when Hulk was there, and Macho Man Randy Savage, Ultimate Warrior, and that era, and then eventually going to work for TBS. Sadly, it was time that the business wound down, and that's where my career ended. It's been great, half a century, almost 40 plus years of spread over 5 decades, and I've been one very lucky person, and I have the fans to thank for everything.
JJ, hopefully we'll get to talk again. I would look forward to that. Thank you so much.
All right, Gary.
Okay, have a good day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.